All right, everyone, let's get started. Welcome to the Oracle Apex office hours for July 28th, 2022. My name is Jason Haynes, and I'm a member of the Apex development team. I'm an Apex product manager representing mostly North America. Today, Carsten's going to be talking about Apex 22.1, ORDS, the MySQL Database Service, and all the things in between. But first, we have some announcements and some updates. So as always, you can watch our last session on YouTube and on the Office Hours website. Simply visit apex@oracle.com/office hours to catch all the previous sessions, including this one. It'll be up there as soon as it's available. Coming up soon on August 25th, we have Apex FAQs with Monica Godoy. In this session, Monica will talk about resolving frequently asked questions about Oracle Apex and also questions that have remained pending from past sessions. Upcoming in-person events include the Latin American Oracle Users Group on August 15th through 19th. We have the Apex Nordic Tour, which are Apex Day events in Norway, September 5th, Finland, September 6th, and in Sweden on September 7th. And of course, the upcoming Oracle Cloud World in Las Vegas on October 16th. Hope we can see you there. The Oracle Apex 22.1 patch set bundle 3 is available. It was last updated on July 18th, which is just a week or so ago. When this patch is applied to your instance, the Apex product version will be updated to 22.1.3. You can download it via My Oracle support, and there's a known issues link there. So please pay attention to that just in case it may apply to your certain circumstances. We have service updates for Apex and Autonomous Database. July 22nd this year, 22.1 is now available in all commercial cloud regions. So everybody should be able to enjoy Apex 22.1. Always refer to apex@oracle.com/go/ADB updates for the latest information. You'll see a tagline like shown there. And now it's time for Carsten to get started telling us all about Apex 22.1, ORDS, and the MySQL Database Service.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And let me start sharing. So I also hope everybody can see my screen okay. Yeah, in the next about 45 minutes, I would like to give you a brief introduction about what Apex and ORDS can do with MySQL databases. And there was pretty much of a change in the latest release, Apex 22.1, as this is actually the first Apex release which is able to talk native SQL to another database, to a different database than Oracle. It does not mean that Apex runs within a MySQL database. That's clearly not possible, as MySQL, as Apex is built using pure SQL, and that's not available in a MySQL database, but Apex can talk to a MySQL database. And from an architectural point of view, this looks pretty much like this, right? So it's not Apex talking to MySQL itself, right? Apex plays together, or let me put it that way, Apex and ORDS are teaming up for this task. And the basic task of talking to the MySQL database is done by ORDS, and ORDS provides a REST-enabled SQL endpoint, and that's nothing new, right? So already 4 years ago, ORDS introduced the REST-enabled SQL feature, and REST-enabled SQL, for those who haven't used it before, it's ORDS exposing, let me say, a special REST endpoint, and that special REST endpoint is able to accept SQL or queries or statements, and those are sent as they are to the database, to the Oracle database, or starting with 22.1 to the MySQL database. They are executed there, and then the results are formatted as a JSON response, and then ORDS passes that back to the caller. As I was saying, REST-enabled SQL is there for 4 years now, and Apex also natively supports REST-enabled SQL since Apex 18. So that is a valid alternative for 4 years now to talk to a remote Oracle database through ORDS REST-enabled SQL. And Apex 22.1 as well as ORDS 22.1 opened that up for MySQL. So ORDS is being configured with to talk to the remote MySQL database, and Apex use the same REST-enabled SQL endpoints to talk to ORDS and thus to the MySQL database. There are a few limitations we have to talk about, right? This feature is not available to talk about any MySQL database on the planet. So that feature of ORDS talking to a MySQL database is limited to MySQL database running in the Oracle Cloud. So let's first have a look on Oracle Cloud and how this looks like. So I logged into a cloud tenancy already, and I won't show how to set up everything from scratch, right? There are how-tos for that available. And let me just point you to a few key areas, right? So in my tenancy, there is a databases section, and here we have our MySQL database system. And in my compartment, which is the Carsten Apex compartment, I set up a MySQL database system before. So we are, as in a good cooking show, a bit of stuff has been prepared in advance, right? So here is my SQL database system that is active and up and running. So here is my database. I could now have another compute instance or my on-premises instance and talk to that MySQL database using MySQL clients, right? However, we want to leverage the REST-enabled SQL functionality of ORDS. And to set that up, you don't have to deploy the ORDS on yourself, and you also don't have to configure the connection between MySQL and ORDS on your own. That is in developer services. And in developer service, by the way, you also find Apex instances here. But another area here is the connections area, and this is the developer tools connection service, and this is actually an ORDS instance which has the connection to the MySQL database. And if I click on that, I can also see it's active, it's running, right? I can even, no, not this one, but I can even start my SQL worksheet, and I can talk to the MySQL database here already, and I can see my databases here. And let's have a look. Start from sapila.film. Let's have a look into one of these tables. And SQL worksheet within the database tools service already allows me to execute SQL queries, and I can also see a bit of data here. Right. So this is basically tells us an ORDS instance is running in our cloud tenancy, or MySQL database is running in our cloud tenancy. Everything has been set up to work together. And now we want to use a REST-enabled SQL. And that is, we need one final piece to head over to Apex. And that is, we will need to authenticate to this ORDS in our cloud tenancy, and that can be done or would be done using the Oracle Cloud authentication. So Oracle Cloud infrastructure allows me to where is my profile? Here is my profile, and in the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, I can set up API keys, right? And this is what I did here already. So and that's pretty similar to other API keys. The only difference for other REST services, you typically have one API key, and when we add a new API key here, we get a public key and a private key, right? So at the end of the day, this means that when we are talking to the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, each of our HTTP requests will be signed, and that's how they are authenticated. And that means we need to provide all the required stuff to Apex so that Apex is able to sign our HTTP requests. So you would download the private key here, and you have a public key fingerprint. So those are the two things we need, and we need a user ID and the tenancy ID. So, and once we have everything together, we can head over to Apex, all right? And I have prepared a little bit already. So, and the first step in Apex would be to create the API key again, right? So we would need to store our authentication credentials in Apex, and that's what we can do here, right? So here in shared components, we would start with adding credentials, right? You would add a new credential, and this would be the MySQL credentials. And once you created your API key with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, you will have an OCI user ID, right? You will have an OCI client ID. You know what? I can even bring up, I can even walk you once through that, right? So let me quickly grab my my key pairs. I can even invalidate that key later on. So what do we have here? We have a tenancy ID, and I would use the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure credential type, right? So we have a tenancy ID, we have a OCI user ID, we have a private key. That's what I, by the way, that's what I downloaded before. If you made a screenshot, feel free, I will drop that key right after the session. And and the public key fingerprint. You will get all these details out of OCI console, right? So let me now save that. And now we have stored these credentials in Apex. And as always for a web credential, these credentials, the secret part of the credential, so the private key is stored encrypted. And there is no way for you as a developer to read the private key again, right? So if you look into the views, that column will be empty. If you edit that again, right, that is empty. So Apex doesn't reveal these secrets in clear text, and internally this stuff is stored encrypted. So the next thing we have is once we have set up the credentials, we can start creating the REST-enabled SQL reference, right? And I already have created one here. So let me copy that URL again and walk you through the process of creating that new reference. That URL is also something you can get out of OCI console. I will also point you, as I didn't show how to set all these things up, I will also add something to the show notes. Our colleague Peter O'Brien did a great blog posting on how to set up the database tools connection service based on a running MySQL service in the cloud. We will put that together with the slides to the show notes of this office hour session. Okay. So, and that will also tell you where to find the URL, and you can take that to set up this in your own cloud tenancy. Okay, so let's now take that URL and create a new REST-enabled SQL service, right? Just to show that that process, MySQL on Oracle Cloud, right? Paste the URL in, and now here it asks for credentials, and the basic authentication doesn't work with Oracle Cloud, but we can, of course, use our new MySQL credentials. And then Apex, as always with REST-enabled SQL, tests that connection. So it does a first request to the MySQL Database Service and sends a query off. So it even does a test query. So we can see the context we are created in. And as in MySQL, there is something different to Oracle databases, right? In MySQL, you have that one instance and you have multiple databases in that instance. And so in MySQL, typically what's in Oracle, a schema, that's in MySQL typically a database. These concepts don't match one to one, but roughly a database in MySQL is a schema in Oracle, right? So let's pick Sakila, which is a demo schema, as the default database, store that, and here is now our REST-enabled SQL reference. So, and now we can start using that. Let's try that out. The first thing we want to do is create a report page. And I would like to start with an interactive report. And let's now try to be an Apex developer, right? So report on the film table. All right, here is our data source. So we can pick our REST-enabled SQL service, and here doesn't matter which one we should use, right? And as always in Apex, we can work based on tables. Here are the tables from MySQL. You might notice one first interesting difference. This is all lowercase. And that's not the only difference, right? To really get a feeling for that, let me go with a SQL query. Let me drag that around a bit. So, and now let me type in a SQL query. So I can do a select star from the, and that should validate. It does. So in Oracle, I could also say select star from film in uppercase. Let me validate that again. Oh, this doesn't work. So it already tells us something, right? In MySQL, table names are case sensitive, even if you're not quoting them. So that's really a difference. And it again reminds us, if we are used to the Oracle database, in other databases, things are different, right? We are used to, oh, the case doesn't matter, right? Write it mixed case, lowercase, uppercase. It always works. And only in special cases, we need to encode. Encoding in special cases is also required on MySQL. However, it always matters whether we use lowercase, uppercase, or mixed case, right? Because by default, you can flip MySQL. MySQL has the concept of a SQL mode, and that with that you can control the behavior on this. But by default, table names are case sensitive. Oh, and by the way, if you are about to quote something in MySQL, also while we are in the area of the differences between databases, that's not the way how to quote a table, an object name in MySQL. In MySQL, you have to use the backtick. And that's also something you can control with a SQL mode, right? So that's potentially of interest once you start building SQL queries or working with or playing with this and build SQL queries on top of MySQL. So far, so good. Let me now create that page. And as always, create page wizard now describes the table and builds an interactive report page for us. Page designer comes up. So there we are. And here's our report on the film table. Again, here's my query. And we can see all the columns. Guess what? All the columns are also lowercase now. And yeah, it is because everything is case sensitive in MySQL. When I was first working with that, actually, that was really something which took me a bit to get familiar with. But it's really, when working with the Oracle database for so many years, you really get to the habit that normally the case of table names doesn't, or column names doesn't matter, but that's a change here. Okay, let's run our new page. So, and there is an interactive report with data from our MySQL database, right? And you can see that all the interactive report features do work as you would expect them, right? So I can filter by the column header, and Apex executes a different SQL query, right? So we can also have, let me filter data a bit down. So what else? So what do we have now? Still quite some data. So let me also then let me then do a bit of text searching, right? I would now it's just one thing left. And what we can also do, of course, we should be able to do a control break on the rental rate, right? I might turn off that filter then. I also might turn off the row text so that we can see a bit more. So here's the rental rate of 99. So you can see I think somewhere on the next page, there is the next control group. But the interesting bit now is how does Apex do that, right? It's talking to a MySQL database. So let's turn on, and that's my usual saying during office hours or other presentation. You want to know what happens inside of your Apex. What does Apex do to bring that result onto the screen? Turn on debug mode, right? Turn on debug mode and review debug output. For a first glance, the info level is totally fine. If you want to know all the details, you might turn on the full trace, but be warned, you get a lot of stuff when turning on a full trace, right? So let me have a look into debug output, right? And we can scroll down a bit until we get to the interesting parts. And here is what Apex actually did. So you see that Apex did its normal job of generating some outer SQL around the report query. Your report query is actually here, and it also applied the filter here. And the control break is actually that's done within the report. We might want to use an aggregation, right, and the sum or the average of the length. Let's use something like that. And now let's review the SQL again, so that we can see a bit more than just a where filter. Right, and here you can see what it does. It looks pretty familiar, right? So a lot of SQL constructs we are used to are available in MySQL. So what Apex had to learn, so the good news for Apex was that all that communication to the MySQL database, ORDS does that for us, right? And by the way, ORDS does that not only for Apex, you can also use your own REST client to talk to the connection tool service, that REST interface, how to talk to that REST-enabled SQL endpoint. That's all well documented. So you can build your own applications talking to the connection service using REST-enabled SQL with your own REST client, your own program, which just sends off the right REST requests and gets the right responses back. Apex does nothing else. But what Apex still had to do, Apex can't send Oracle-specific SQL to MySQL. A lot of stuff is standardized, but as it always is, right? Not everything. So one thing that springs immediately into our eye is the backticks for quoting, and the analytic function for the average. That actually looks very familiar. It would work no different in Oracle, but there are a few other SQL constructs which don't work in MySQL. And sometimes we are able to emulate those. In other cases, we are not, right? So if you look very carefully, you would see that there is no pivot view here. Pivot, the SQL pivot clause is not available on MySQL, and thus the functionality is missing for such an interactive report. We can have a chart, right? So let's build a chart based on a rating. The value might be the length, and we would use the sum. And then we might review that chart SQL as well. Oh, yeah, I might turn off that filter. And here are the breakdown of film length by rating. Again, we can have a look into what happened, and we can check whether there is something special about this. At the end of the day, it looks pretty close to what we would do in an Oracle database, again, except the quoting and also some tweaks to the order by clause. For instance, MySQL does not support nulls first or nulls last order, right? So these are stuff where sometimes Apex uses a different SQL construct to make the functionality available. For more complex stuff like pivoting, Apex just tells us, oh, feature is not available, sorry. When we look another place where we can really see a difference between the Oracle and the MySQL database is when we look at compute, and we have a look at the functions operators over here, right? So a lot of these are familiar or are known from the Oracle database also. Like LTRM or LPAC, that's what we're used to, but make date and make time, for instance, are not available on Oracle. So that dialog also is aware of where we are. And these are functions you can use in MySQL on an Oracle database that looks slightly different and shows you the functions you can use on Oracle, right? Okay, let me do another thing. And one of the features from a development point of view I was most interested in was faceted search, right? Can we make faceted search available on MySQL? And there is only one way to find that out. And that is, let's try creating such a region, right? Facets on REST Enabled SQL. Pick our MySQL service. And now I would not bother with a SQL query. Let me simply pick the table from here. These Zoom windows are always at the wrong place. So now again, we are asked for Apex makes a few proposals for facets. So the title is definitely not the best candidate for a facet, but the rating is a good one. I would actually love to have the rental rate and the duration, but we will have to add them later on. So let me go with the rating. And then we can also manually add another facet for the rental rate. And then we can see how this works. So at least the wizards allow me to create a faceted search on my MySQL table, right? So page designer comes up. Before running that page, let me quickly add that other facets also. The rate, which is a facet group. The label is good. The list of values should be distinct values as usual. That all looks good. Just keep one thing in mind. Lowercase column names, don't forget, right? And the data types are, by the way, all mapped to Oracle data types. So Oracle does that job of mapping the MySQL database to the Oracle types. So let's now run our page and see what we get. Here is our report, and the facets should come in an instant. And there we are. So faceted search works. So we can have the faceted search experience. And I'm limiting to R-rated movies now, which have a rental rate of, come on, $4.99. And I can see how my result set is trimmed down. Again, a very interesting piece is to see the generated SQL. And here is actually a difference in between what Apex does on Oracle versus MySQL. In Oracle, there's a SQL clause for that count computation, which is the grouping sets clause. Not available on MySQL, and that's what I was saying before. If something is not available on MySQL, we emulate it, right? And in that case, that means we are generating a union all query, which gets the counts for us, right? So faceted search also does work. It's half time. Another interesting bit is, let me try to create a map also, right? And here I think it was the addresses table. Addresses. I didn't try that out before, but I think that should work. No, not the local table. REST Enabled SQL, again, MySQL. And MySQL also has a geometry type, and that that's my address type. I think that's the right one. Let me go with that, and let me see, do I have a geometry column location? There we are, right? Here is my geometry column, and I have a tooltip column. No, faceted search is not needed yet, so I would just like to see the map. So once page designer comes up, we can review everything. So this is our map region, which was created for us. And I'm not That's the interesting bit, right? So the geometry column is not the Oracle SDO geometry, of course. It's MySQL, right? MySQL has its own geometry data type. And when Apex talks to MySQL, this arrives in Apex as GeoJSON. But the good news is the map region in Apex can use GeoJSON. We don't have to use SDO geometry. And so we can simply map the GeoJSON column as our geometry column. And here is our map. And I think after a while, we should see a few markers coming in from the MySQL database. And there we are, right? A map directly from a MySQL database in Apex, as usual, with no code, right? So this seems to work very well. What components can we use? I've shown you how interactive reports work, how faceted search work, how the map works. I didn't tap into charts or the calendar or to tree. Try that out on your own if you wish. So for Apex 22.1, we added support for all read-only region types. So all the region types which don't modify data, that's supported over REST-enabled SQL with a MySQL database as well. What's not supported yet, that's all sorts of DML. So you can create a form region on a MySQL database, and the loading stuff, so you can run the page, the form will load with data, but you cannot save the data. Same is for an interactive grid. You can create an interactive grid region, but it can't be editable. So Apex does not support declarative DML, but all read-only components where Apex grabs the data and visualizes somehow, that works, right? And as MySQL is part of the standard, let me say, data infrastructure in Apex, plugin developers can seamlessly hook into MySQL databases. So if you build a plugin based on the Apex exec package, your plugin will seamlessly work with MySQL, right? Except you are generating, no, that's a bit too early, except you would be generating Oracle-specific SQL, then not. But as long as you really just work with the query provided by the developer and the plugin just does some visualization, that should work with MySQL just out of the box, right? Because that is all encapsulated away. A few other thoughts, right? And so we now always created various regions on top of the MySQL database. But now I have, especially as an Apex developer, I always need to type in those queries, right? So here, with picking the table, it's easy enough, right? But we all know how things are in practice. How often is it sufficient to just work on a table? Let's get it straight. We need to use the SQL query most of the time, right? But I'm not so used to my SQL functions. I always have to look the functions up, right? I always get the syntax wrong. And at the end of the day, and that's not only true for MySQL, it's actually also true for Oracle databases. We are talking to a remote database, right? And as the database is remote, we might not be too familiar with what is the best query for that database. What should we do? What should we avoid? Maybe in that list of tables, there are a few tables where the owner of that database says, oh yes, that table is there, but please don't use it, right? We don't know. And unfortunately, the table isn't named, do not use it. So we would just go ahead and start using the table. And 3 months later, somebody reviews our code and then, oh, why did you use that table? That's not to be used. You have to change everything. So at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about databases which are farther away, it would be great if we had a way to provide a curated set of queries, right? And that's where the related feature kicks in. And that's the second part of my presentation today, which is built upon the first. And that is another new feature we already have shown in the first office hours for Apex 22.1. And if you attended the series of 22.1 office hours, you have seen a new feature in the REST data source area, which we called a new REST data source type. And maybe you asked ourselves why we added that. And there was good reasons also without MySQL, but I think MySQL makes it very clear why this is there and the value comes out immediately. right? So we can create a REST data source, and we called it the type is REST enabled SQL query. And this is a bit of a different REST data source, right? So as you can see, I picked the REST enabled SQL query type, and I can't enter an endpoint URL anymore because this is connected to REST enabled SQL. So I give it a name, the films table, right? And now I have to pick a REST enabled SQL reference. Okay, let me go on. Now it wants to have the query here. Let's do a bit of SQL, right? By the way, you can also use page items here, right? That's absolutely possible. Or that's a parameter. You can use parameters here. Oh, let me do that. Rating, right? So I have a bind variable here, right? Oh, let me go back, please. So if there is no value for the parameter, we want to see everything, right? Let me validate that. Good. Okay. So see the credentials. We use the one we are using for the MySQL database anyway. And now we should see the data from the film table again. So this is now a REST data source. And the interesting bit is that the query is now part of the REST data source. So here's my films table. One bit is still missing, right? I used the bind variable here, but I didn't. Oh, we already have it. Oh, right. So this was parsed, and we already have a parameter here, which is great. So let me now use that. And you will, when we build the page, you will see how that is now different. Let's get rid of the map again. And let me now bring up the interactive report we had before. And I would pick a REST source now. And I'm using the films table. See the difference? I get the columns immediately without even having to bother about the query or the syntax. I get my rating parameter here. So let me create another region, right, which is rating. And these are results. And now let me add a page item, which is the rating. I'm going with a text field here. Let me do that the simple way. Button, submit. Of course, this could be done, or could all be done way better than I'm doing it here. But I think for the sake of time, that's acceptable. So then we are mapping our REST source parameter to our page item. And I have my report, which is dependent on an item, which reaches out to the MySQL data. We see all the data if we have, if we did provide nothing. So let me type in G exists, right? And send it off again. And now I only see G ratings, right? In the page, I can even try something like that. And now I should see no rows at all anymore because that rating doesn't exist. So I easily hook up a query on a remote database as it was a REST data source, and the query is encapsulated away. And of course, if I need the same query for a chart or some other region on another page, I can simply reuse my REST data source, right? So it's really encapsulated away. But this also gives us a lot of more features. So we now have the REST enabled SQL source comes as a REST data source. And now all the features of REST data sources are available. So REST data sources can more than just show the data. We can use local post-processing. So how about taking that films data and joining that to a local table, right? And this is a local Oracle table. We can have a join between MySQL and Oracle, right? Just because it comes as a REST data source. We can even do more. That's what I didn't want. We can even do more. We can, if we have a REST data source, wait, a few releases ago, there was, we introduced a feature which allows to easily synchronize. We can download data from the REST data source to the local Apex database. Let me try whether this works, right? So here's my REST data source again. That was my query. All looks as it was before. Oh, by the way, here's the data profile. I don't like, perhaps don't like a few of these columns. So the length column, that's a column I don't like, right? So let me, I can't get rid of it anymore because I'm using that REST data source, but I could change the data type, but I could also add a column, right? So I could add a derived column, for instance. So len2, and then I could have a SQL expression, and that now is an Oracle SQL expression. So I would just say length by 2, and now I have amended the results from my SQL with something which I derived from that, and that's all part of the REST data source. But that's what I didn't want to show. That just flew through my mind. I wanted to try out synchronization. So hey, it would be cool if I could use all that setup to just download all that data to my local table. And so then let me create a new table, films local. Let me save that. Let me create a table, and we have demonstrated the synchronization a few times before. So I think I don't need to spend too much time on this. The synchronization is now running. And after a few seconds, it should finish somehow, and then we should see our data in our local table. There we are. This is our films local table with the data downloaded from that remote database. And you don't even notice that this is data from MySQL, and we can now decide whether we want to directly reach out to the MySQL database, or whether we want to use that one as a cache. Oh, it's a cache, so we might want to refresh that every now and then. So let me schedule a daily synchronization. And also we might want to use the merge synchronization method if we have a primary key, so that updates are also processed. But I think that doesn't work, right? I didn't define a primary key column, right? So back to the data profile, mark one of the columns as primary key, and then you can use the merge. I would now use the replace. So, and this is our synchronization. And now on my report, I can even go ahead and say, oh, let me use my local table, right? And now the parameter doesn't work anymore, right? Because we are now synchronizing. It doesn't send off a query anymore. So the parameter doesn't have any meaning, but we can use the interactive report search, and you can see everything. It's just a local table, and we can, let me add a filter on the MySQL table, and we can simply work on that. And you can see that the responses come back way quicker now because the network latency is gone now. The final thing I would like to show is that, so it's all very nice. So we can create a set of REST data sources, and I could create a few more. But actually, somebody else might want to do that for me. Somebody who is familiar with the remote database, who can work out the queries, and then I would just like to use them. How can we have a set of REST data sources with all that knowledge built in and distributed? And that is where the REST source catalog kick in. Since Apex 21.2, we have within the workspace utilities, there is the REST source catalogs area. And I already uploaded the catalog here. And the catalog is actually a set of prepared, if you will, curated REST data sources. So we have, for instance, the films table here. So it has a description, right? So that base URL is actually wrong. I even created one of those, and we see the data profile. So whatever the curator of that catalog did before, I'm just I'm just benefiting from that. So, and here, for instance, is something show all customers stored in the Sapila database along with their addresses. Oh, it's a join even. So that's an interesting one. So let's try that out, right? I will now add a new REST data source from the catalog. So with work I did before. And now I'm not creating from scratch. I'm going towards my catalog. Right, here are my GitHub REST APIs. No, not these. I want to use that one. And here are my customers with addresses. I will be reusing my API key. We can use, no, not that one. We can use that one. Both are the same. So the credentials we used before. So, and here is my customers with addresses. Right, let me now, and here we can also see the queries. So somebody invested some work here, right? And now it doesn't have parameters, but let's try it out and see whether we get something back. Oh, come on, takes a while. Oh, maybe not the best query.
It's got a bunch of joins, didn't it? Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, so maybe I should have a look into that MySQL database. Maybe a few indexes are needed there, but at the end of the day, you can see the query comes back. Oh, it even has location information. But it's now the same as you had before, right? We can simply create that REST data source and run that. So here is my interactive report. Go with the REST data source. I don't even have to look into what I need to query, and can run the page. Let's see whether it was just a question of warming up, or maybe a networking hiccup. So the second time it came back quicker, right? But I don't have to worry about the queries. Somebody else did that for me, and I just received the catalog. I add that to my application, to my workspace, and start using the remote REST data sources here. And it's important to know the combination of REST-enabled SQL and the REST data source. Let me emphasize on that. And that's not restricted to MySQL, of course, right? If you're talking to a remote Oracle database using REST-enabled SQL, you can do the same thing, right? So with Apex 22.1, we added native support for MySQL. That is the first half of the session, right? Where we added all the ability to Apex to, when talking to ORDS REST-enabled SQL, and Apex knows, oh, I'm talking to a MySQL database. So what Apex had to learn is to talk the MySQL language, right? The MySQL dialect. And as you know how it is with dialects, the language is the same, but if the dialects are incompatible, nobody understands each other. And that's exactly the same, right? Apex had to learn the MySQL dialect. German people might think about a Northern German who had to learn Bavarian, right? That gives you a good idea about that. The second half is that we saw some value in combining. So both REST-enabled SQL and REST data sources are there for 4 years now. But there is some value in bringing that together, right? And that's what you've seen before. We can create a REST data source on top of a query on a REST-enabled SQL data source. And that allows us to encapsulate stuff, to join remote with local data, to leverage the catalogs, to leverage the synchronization. A lot of existing functionality in Apex just becomes available for REST-enabled SQL sources now. So it's a lot of infrastructure you can use. I didn't even touch on the Apex XClear SQL package, which of course also supports all that, details on plugin development. I didn't touch on a few components like the pop-up LOV, which also supports all that. So wherever you see the free data source types of local database, remote database, and REST source, on all these in all these areas, MySQL is supported now. That's pretty much all I have. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Carsten. Yeah, we got a ton of questions. Starting from the top, I guess, when MySQL connection will be available on premise Apex version. So when will we be able to do this with an on-premise Apex version?
So you can use on premises MySQL and the connection service that has to run in the cloud.
Okay. Does it work well with MySQL forks such as AWS Aurora, or is there any plan to extend to other SQL databases such as Postgres?
So this is all open. There are no decisions on that yet, and there are no immediate plans on that. So this is all to be decided. MySQL forks. So in that case, it's MySQL on OCI. So it would fall under the limitations, and we did not test with all sorts of MySQL forks.
All right, so that answers the next question. It's only available on OCI. It's not possible to do the same thing with a local MySQL database.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So what is the performance loss of communicating Apex REST SQL to MySQL and OCI? Does the performance scale with the size of the MySQL instance?
So that is, so we have two kinds of questions here, right? So one is the actual performance of executing the SQL within MySQL. So how fast does the MySQL instance execute the query? And here is the heatwave feature you can turn on. So you can use the clustered MySQL database can use MySQL heatwave to get how do we call it, to get cost optimal performance on MySQL. And on the other side, there's the overhead of network communication, right? Network communication on OCI is optimized. So, but still, it's talking to the MySQL database over REST, right? It's HTTP, it's JSON-based communication. That's always not as fast as a binary communication using a MySQL driver directly, right? So it has to be a difference here. But I think the most interesting, or the lion's share of any performance question will be how fast does MySQL execute that very query? And for that question, it doesn't matter whether you approach the MySQL database using a JDBC driver directly, or using ORDS REST enabled SQL, or any other means. You're running a query in a MySQL database, right?
Got it. Thank you. So are there any restrictions on the data type when you're doing the queries?
Let me think about that. Do we have special restrictions there? So at the end of the day, our Apex maps everything into Oracle representations, right? So in Apex, when the Apex engine executes a query, then all the MySQL data types are mapped to the Oracle data types which Apex uses, because an interactive report, when the SQL query is executed, the data comes back from a MySQL database. To render that interactive report, that happens in the Oracle database, that happens in Apex in PL SQL. So here we are in the world of date, number, VACA2, and we are not in the world of text, tiny text, small int, and these other things anymore. So Apex maps the MySQL database to the Oracle database. So there is, for instance, no time. There is no support for that time-only data type. You can use it in your SQL queries. So if you have a cool where clause, so whatever is inside your SQL query, here you can use the full MySQL word, right? But as soon as data leaves MySQL and comes down to Apex, we map it to the Oracle word, and then, for instance, dates or time data types are mapped to the Oracle equivalent, and you get a date data type back. And there can be, I remember there is one MySQL data type, I think it was time, if I'm not mistaken, which has no direct equivalent in Apex. Another instance is, for instance, the bit data type, right? There is nothing like that in Oracle, and we have to do a mapping here. So the bit 1 is typically used in the MySQL word to have that Boolean, true or false, and that is mapped to a VACA with the values true or false, right? So we do some mapping here. And when there is really no equivalent in the Oracle database, you see that this is mapped so that Apex can best use these data types. But sometimes you will have in your SQL queries, it's best to do the translation in the SQL query so that the mapping works as you expect.
Interesting. Thank you. That makes sense. So what about blob support? Does that get converted to base 64 in a query, or does it not work?
That's correct. Blob support is supported, but it's not.
Good.
So blob support, let me add that, that's important. Some regions like the cards and the map region, the blob support in those regions work. And you can seamlessly display blob-based images on your map or within your cards region. However, in classic and interactive report, the blob support will not work, but that's not because of MySQL. That's because that blob support doesn't work with remote data sources anyway. So you can't even use in classic and interactive reports, blob only work with local data sources.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carsten. It's been very informative, and I've learned a lot myself. So I hope everyone else had a chance to absorb a lot of this information, and I hope you'll be able to, get out there and play with it yourselves. All right. So that's the end of Q&A. Was there any other questions that anyone wanted to throw out real quick? No? Uh-oh, what happened here? Okay, well, I'm sharing my screen again, and you should be able to see that I'd like to give a shout out to the Ideas and New Features app for Apex. Please visit this website as often as you can, do some queries, see if your ideas are already posted. If they're not posted, get them posted. And let's talk a little bit more about how to make Apex better with each new release. We're all very active on the content here, and we participate in the questions and discussion with all these different new feature ideas. So please make an effort to visit apex.oracle.com/ideas whenever you can. Thank you for attending, and this concludes today's Apex Office Hours. Thank you again to our special presentation by Carsten. We really appreciate it. We all learned a lot. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.